Good morning, or hello. This is the third class video. This one's on fundamentals of data storage concepts. It's going to be done during week 1, and it is on www.cwmclass.com, but that's only for supplemental information. Everything you need will be on Blackboard. The third assignment for the week are these 4 questions. I want 3 examples of real-world databases, and then 1 example that you can't use but would qualify is the library contains a database of books. All those books are a database of information. Okay, question 2, what's the data independence? What is data independence and why is it important? 3, what is the purpose of managing information? And 4, what's metadata? Now, for 2, 3, and 4, I'm looking for at least a sentence and no more than a paragraph. So don't write War and Peace. I'm just trying to get your high-level understanding of it. We're going to be talking about data storage and trying to decide what the best way to store data is. And if you think about how to store data without a database management system, I'm going to ask you to think in terms of writing data onto a computer tape. On a computer tape, one character goes from top to bottom, and it's more than a dot width. The truth is, I don't know how many dots wide it is, but you start at the end of the tape and you write a character. You advance the tape 1 position. In fact, the machine does this. And you write the next character, and you advance the tape another position, you write another character, and so forth, so that you keep doing that till you've got all the data stored. Now, one of the things that we have to do is have some end of file signal so that the tape reader won't put the whole tape out on the floor, which is quite dramatic, but not very much fun when you've got to wrap it all back up. And on disk storage, we're also going to have to give the machine a way to know when it gets to the end, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, I know that this is an analogy, and each OS or operating system and the hardware is different at the detailed level. But in technology, it's typical to deal with layers or levels of that technology, so that the driver car doesn't worry about how a transmission works. They just know that when they put it in D, it's drive and it goes forward. They trust the designer of the transmission to know how to design the transmission so it'll work. The transmission designer uses lubricant, but he doesn't know how to make the lubricant. He just trusts the people at the petroleum company to make the lubricant. That's an example of layers of a technology. And as complex as our technological world is today, if you learn a layer, you may be interested to go down and learn other layers, but if you try to learn them all at the same time, you'll never get anything done. So I'm asking you to kind of approach this data today through this analogy. And we're discussing the concepts for data storage, not discussing how to build or access RAM, or how to access disk packs or whatever, but just the concept of how you write something into storage. So how could we store data? Well, with no system, if we have that, go back and look at that punch tape, we just have a bunch of dots or maybe characters, but we don't know what any of them mean. Okay, there are alternatives. We can have fixed length records. We can have delimited records. We can use JSON. Or, I hope at the end of this, you're going to think that you ought to be using a database system in most cases. All right. Let's go back and review those records that we had on the recipe card. And we're only going to use a subset. We're only going to talk about title field, the serve field, the prep time field, and the cook time field. And based on the size of the records we had on the card, we know that the title is going to have to be 15 characters wide. And the next starting at 16 is going to be 2 positions for the serve, and prep time is going to be starting at 18 to 19. It will be 2 position for how many minutes it takes to prep something, and cook time's 2 positions. Now, we can have whole courses on trying to decide how wide those fields are, but for today, that's how wide they are. So let's look at the 3 records that we're going to use in our explanations today. We're going to have, and so we put them in a table, and here's a row of the table, and some people call it a spreadsheet later, and here is a column. So we've got the title column, and we have a carrot cake, which the record is serves 4, 30, 45 minute prep cook time, and so forth. Okay, if we do a fixed length record, it's going to look like this. So that you've got the first record, and then you start the second record. But it doesn't take, and this EOF is into file, which is the way that we would signal, and there's an ASCII code for it, and depending on how you're storing and so forth. But I'm just have this out there to show that we'd have to mark the end of the file some way, so that if we go back and think about that paper tape reader, it doesn't run the whole blank tape out on the floor. But in fixed length, it's a whole lot easier if you put column numbers over, so that you can figure out which position everything's in. And so we go to 15 for our title, and 16 and 17, that's 10, 11, 12, and so forth. 16 and 17 are the serves quantity. Well, we're not going to print a 0, so we've just got a 6 and the 7 position. Now it is of interest that if that 6 had been in the 16 position, a lot of code would have said, oh, well, that must mean that it's 60. And that's got its own problems, and you can think about that on your own time. But just that's some of the problems about why fixed length records are so much fun to program when you're writing code to do them. You've got to deal with all those conditions. And so here comes the second record, and there's the third record. All right, what are the advantages of fixed length? It's simple logic for a program. It's easy to write, and once you've got it working, it's fairly easy to read. The disadvantage is each record uses the maximum amount of space, so that when we were talking about carrot cake, you've got these spaces that in this case aren't doing anything, but you're still going to use them up on the tape or in your storage media. Making any changes in the data structure requires a complete rewrite of the file. If we decided that we wanted to have, we're going to have more than recipes that serve more than 99 people, to make that be a 3 position field, we've got to read it and write it back in a different format. There's no easy way to do random access. If you want to get to the apple pie recipe, your only choice is to read down through till you get to apple pie. And it needs external documentation. Looking at this, you don't know what it is. You can't have any way of knowing whether that's the zip code or whether that's 3 fields or whatever. Okay, if we talk about delimited, and a lot of the old programs used to use what's called a pipe to delimit, and so it would look like carrot, pipe 6, pipe 30, pipe 45, pipe, and then a new row so that it was easier to tell, and so forth. And I left off a pipe here, and I apologize. Okay, another delimited is called CSV, or comma separated values. And with anything, any delimited, the problem you're worried about is if you have a pipe in your data, then your programs reading the data are going to get very confused. So people were using commas instead of pipes And then they started having problems that people would write Maysville, comma, Kentucky and put them in a record or put it in a field. And so you'd have a comma in it. So then they started putting double quotes around each field. Okay, it takes less space if you've got a lot of things like we had with Applegate, where you had a lot of blanks. It may take more though, because if you don't have many blanks, you're going to have added all those extra delimiters. It's more portable across hardware because there's many programs that know how to read delimited data, particularly Excel. But lots of things know how to read delimited data. The danger is that the data, if the delimiter is in the data, you got deep problems. Disadvantages: to change the data structure, you still got to rewrite the complete file. If you want to, you don't have to do it if you're going from 2 positions for serves to 3. That doesn't require it. But if you want to add a new field, then you got to rewrite your whole data structure. There's no easy way to do random access. You still probably need external documentation. One of the things I forgot to mention is you have the ability to put your header row in and put your titles. And that's particularly nice when you're loading into a Microsoft program or lots of programs, because they'll pick that up and use them as column headings. But even with that, you're going to need external documentation to tell you whether the time to prep is in minutes or hours or those sorts of issues. Okay, there's a new game in town called JSON, and it looks like this. And so you have the recipe. This to here says that that is a table, and the table's name is recipe, and it's made up of this deck, which are these records. So we have a record whose first field is title, and it's carrot cake, and the next one is serves, and it's quantity 4, and prep time, and 30 minutes, and cook time, and 45 somethings. And you can have 3 or 1 or however many you want. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's really come in as we've gotten to HTML5 and as we're talking about more and more web-based things. The world is really moving toward this in a big way, but it's self-documenting because you know that the table name is recipe, you know that the first field's name is title. It's more portable across hardware. The disadvantages are it's newer, so that older programs do not support it, and no easy way to do random access. Okay, I hope after looking at that and thinking about having to write C programs or Visual Basic programs or something, you're going to decide that using the database has got a lot of advantages, because the rest of this course is going to talk to you about database systems. And a database system is a collection of programs that enable users to create and maintain data. It controls all the access to the data. It has a number of tables in a database, and each of those tables contains fields. Provided the ability to modify the characteristics of an existing table or field. If you have a database and you want to add a new field, or you want to make a field bigger in a table, you can do it without losing having to lose all your physical data. And if you do have to lose the physical data, you won't really lose it, because the database system will be smart enough to do it for you. It also has the ability to build indexes. The characteristics of a database, its self-describing nature of the database system. And by that, the database actually holds tables, which lets it know how you're structuring your data. So you're insulated between the program and the data. Data independence means that you can access data and not even know where the data is located. At Stober Drives, where I worked, we had programs running in Kentucky that were accessing data in Germany. We didn't know everything in that, all the fields in that table, but we could get to the fields that we wanted. And the database was able to do all the background for us. Enforce integrity constraints. If we decide that you don't want to have duplicate social security numbers, or you want this to be the product of that, you can build those constraints into the database so that as records are entered or tried to be updated, it checks to make sure that all the constraints that you've said you want your data to conform to, that your data is like that. Because once you've got dirty data into a system, it's very hard to get it cleaned up. But with a database, you can make sure it doesn't go in until it meets all your constraints. You can control data redundancy so that if you decide that you only want to have, you're going to organize people by their social security number, which by the way is illegal now, but if you decide that you're going to organize by social security number as the primary key, your database can make sure if somebody tries to add a new employee or a new customer and finds out that that social security number is out there, it will automatically alert them. And data sharing so that people from the payroll department and from the front desk, many different people can come in and get to the same data rather than having all these silos with the data duplicated all over the company or the household. Some allow sharing of data to support the access by a multi-user system. I say some because, for example, Access is a single user database, and it doesn't have the ability to do journaling and the ability to have multiple users and begin work and stop work and so forth. But things like MySQL and SQL and Informix and Oracle and DB2 and the list goes on, are designed specifically to do multi-user systems with multiple people accessing the same data, and we'll talk about more of that over the period of time. Supports multiple views of data so that people in the payroll department can see the pay rate of employees, but people at the front desk who just wanted to find out what department they're in and their office telephone number can't see the pay rate. Transaction processing, which is the example of if you have multiple people trying to work on a bank account, if you don't have transaction, you have a program that goes in and picks up account number 10, and when that reads it, it has $1,000 in the bank account as its balance. And so the reason the program read it is because the person at the counter has just accepted a $100 deposit, and they're going to tell the program that they want to put that $100 into the account, but before they can hit the enter key, the phone rings. And they're on the phone giving good customer service, but it takes 10 minutes. Well, during that time, somebody in a different window in a branch across town tries to clear a check for $10 check on that account. Well, if you have transaction processing, when they try to go get the balance, it's going to lock them out and say, somebody's in this account right now, we can't do that transaction. If you don't, the problem is that their program reads, oh, there's $1,000, I'm writing a $10 check, $10 from $1,000 is $990, and they put it back as the balance in the account is now $999. Well, the person gets off the telephone, hangs up, goes over and hits the enter key, and their program thinks that there's $1,100 in the bank account because it knows when it was there when it started, and nobody protected it, and so it would write back $1,100 balance. Well, at the end of the month, the bank doesn't know where the $10, they cashed the check and they sent the money, but they're out of balance. So you want programs that can begin work and commit work. And that's called transaction processing. So that and if you want to talk about that in office hours and more explanation, I'll be glad to do that. And we'll cover that topic later anyway. All right, so you can restrict unauthorized access. So if you have pay records that tell pay rates, you probably only want people in the HR department to get to those, and the database will make that so. Backup and recovery facilities, it's important to be able, if you got all this data and people are dependent on it, you need to back it up, and you need the ability that if you have a power failure at 10 o'clock in the morning and only one table gets corrupted, you don't want to have to put the whole database back. You want to be able to go back and recover just that one table as of 10 o'clock. And many databases can do that. All right, so let's go over the key terms that you should have seen or will see in the reading. A data type. A data type is talking about a field. Is it a number? If it is a number, how big a number is it? And we'll talk in great detail about that. But when you talk about a data type, you're talking about what sort of data is permitted in a field. Data uniqueness ensures that there are no duplicates are entered. If you decide to build a primary key, the thing that you're going to use to look up a record with, and you do it on, say, address. If you have two records for the same address, then when the fire department looks up to find out who the point of contact is for that address, they won't know who it is because there'll be two of them. With a database, you could prevent that. Metadata. That's a big fancy word. I think we've said, and if I didn't, I should have said, that database management systems use themselves to store data on the data that's stored. And those tables that tell the database system how to store the other data is called metadata. A view is a subset of a database. So if I want people at the front desk to be able to get into the employee record and only see their name, their department, and their office telephone number, I can build a view that only shows that, even though the record for employees knows their home phone and their pay rate, their date of birth, and a lot of stuff that we don't want to show somebody at the front desk. Each way that you would look into a database is called a view. All right, and finally, we're talking about the database project, and basically 60% of the points in this class are on your database project. 50% for the project itself, 10% for your presentation, because in the world today, whether it's at home and you're trying to convince your spouse or whether it's at work, if you have a wonderful idea but you can't explain it to somebody and can't convince them it's a good idea, you're not much better off than if it's just you never had the idea to start with. So right now, what we're trying to do is hone the ability for you to build this sentence later in the project. And the one that comes from Ms. Garrison's example is provide a database system that will help small bakery businesses track customers, orders, menu items, and menu item inventory. The real key here that you're working on right now is that you're going to do it for a small bakery business. And on the first video, your assignment was to come up with at least one and no more than 3 different projects that you want to consider. And as we start moving through it, we'll try to help you have ways to look at what you want to do. But this is not something you want to put off, because 60% of your class is going to come out of this project, and we want to make it easy for you to succeed. And that's the end. And we appreciate you, and if you have any questions, be sure and contact me during office hours. Thank you.